Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Alexis and today I'm just going to be talking about my thoughts on the Princess Stakes. Now, this book came out June 2021 and I've mainly been hearing about it because of the biracial heroine, and it's a book by a biracial author. It takes place during or within a historical setting. It's interracial, all things that I thought would be interesting for a historical romance, right? We hardly ever see people of color in a historical setting and historical romances, with the exception of Ms. Beverly Jenkins. And with that in mind, Beverly Jenkins does a wonderful presentation of, fictitious characters, but within realistic settings that, educate the reader about how people of color, how black people were treated, and how it has evolved over decades, for Americans, right? And how it has taken place post Civil War and such. So, she also does her fair share of contemporary romances, which I have yet to read, but I'll get there. With that in mind, coming from that setting of, being educated and being reminded of people of color persevering, I was looking forward to this book to see how it would be done in 2021. And I'm going to lead by saying this book somewhat reminded me of An Offer from a Gentleman by Julia Quinn. For those of you who don't know, the Bridgerton series did come out on Netflix and it's rated MA. I definitely say it's only for adults. If you want to watch it with your family, do so with caution. There's definitely a timestamp template for, scenes that shouldn't be dealt with kids. But all in all, this definitely gave me An Offer from a Gentleman vibes about Benedict, who is the third son of the Bridgerton series. I did end up reading the full 8-book series after watching that first season. And Ryston, our hero in this story, definitely gives me the vibes of Benedict. He was the third son of, a duke, although in the Bridgertons, Benedict is the second son of a viscount, but I digress. So he has his own duties of what's expected of him, but as a third son, he initially could do anything he wanted, but of course there's this level of expectation that his family imposed on him. But when he's young, 19 and she 16, that's when they meet. He is an officer and she is the princess of India, also descent of an English and Scottish woman who was disowned by her family. She was related to an earl in England, but she fled with her love interest, her lover, an Indian prince who is her father. And she is the offspring of them. Now, with that in mind, there is this idea of expectation. Of course, there's this sense of bigotry within both sides of her family. So, for one, her mother was ostracized for her intentions of loving her father, and her father received the same thing for not being with a pure Indian woman and giving birth to this mulatto. Okay, and as someone who is biracial, I thought that this had a setup for something that I could see myself in again. Of course, I can't fully relate because I don't derive from either of her cultures. I don't identify as an English person. I don't identify as Scottish. I don't identify as Indian, but I do identify as biracial. And of course, there's this level of expectance from both sides of her family's cultures because there are standards of that time. And then as a woman, she is expected to marry, but again, she is educated and she's able to defend herself. All these things that, you would want to see in a 2021 book, right? However, when she is forced to flee the country after assassination is taken place and she has to flee for her safety, she ends up boarding the ship of Ryston. Years later, after they had already parted due to circumstances, this is the second chance romance. It takes place a good chunk at sea, and then the second half in London, and kind of get to see their rekindled love. But for me, there wasn't enough time to see them forgive each other, to gain an understanding of the decisions. Ryston, he tends to do these things that would be pretty. They just made me feel uncomfortable. So, for example, when they were still on the ship, there was this time when he would be giving her really difficult tasks that weren't expected for someone of her station, for a princess to do, such as mucking out the stalls of the cattle and then not giving her bath water to bathe herself, whereas he would woefully help her lady's maid and manservant once they are discovered, because they stowed away without his permission, and he's the captain and now Duke of Embry. So he decides to stay silent when she is in the middle of bathing in his bath without his permission, but he keeps himself silent in the room without announcing himself as she's bathing. That was definitely creepy to me. I did not think it was cute in any way, even if he was trying to be like seductive with it, and after the fact, I didn't like that. Another point, when they first kissed, he pulls away, but then right after, he needs to get in fisticuffs with his first-hand man, Gideon. And Gideon is somewhat a supporting role. I can be appreciative somewhat, but bare minimum. If anything, his sister, who appears in the later half of the book, and whose book is going to be published this coming October, she was probably my favorite supporting character from this book, and there's definitely a setup for her romance in here. I suspect one of the characters, but I'm not going to say much about that because I want to focus on everything that I felt could have been done better in this book. Now, Sarani, she is a princess who had to flee her country. She is now put in this spot where she feels she has to rely on Ryston for her protection, and he poses it this way. He lies to her to keep her from parting from him when they have a pit stop for goods, and she was meant to leave, but he lies and poses the issue that maybe they're being followed, maybe her assassinator is still coming after her, or whoever, her cousin who's in power and such. That goes throughout the book. And I can't really say I was comfortable with how it ended. It was just, I don't know. The problem within this book definitely dragged throughout. The idea of her past coming after her. On top of that, Ryston couldn't, how should I say this? He couldn't understand her predicament and her duties as a princess, and he just held it against her for 5 years. She initially was going to run away with him as promised. However, due to last-minute decisions, she decided to stay behind for her father's sake, for her people's sake, for the future of her people. She decided to stay, and he couldn't understand that. As the third son of a duke, he couldn't understand until 5 years later, when accidents happen and all of a sudden he is forced into the dukedom, and he can somewhat understand her responsibilities, but they're definitely not the same. He doesn't seem to accept everything that she is, because he's still very aware that his family, particularly his mother, will not accept a marriage between them. he's aware that the Tun, the peerage, will not accept a marriage between them because she is of mixed descent and the daughter of a countess who was disowned by her family in English society. So there's definitely this weight of, that there is no better way for me to say it than it being Benedict vibes from the Bridgertons. Like, she is not worthy of his marriage status as a duke. But she's a princess in her own country. So there's this bigoted wall between their societies, and he seems to lean into it, although he still loves her, but he doesn't like it. He doesn't like the fact that he can't be with her because of everything that pulls them apart. But in actuality, as a duke, he could do what he wants. And sure, they'll be shunned, but at least they'll be together, which is how it does end along those lines. But I don't want to spoil too much about it. I did end up tagging throughout the book times where I really appreciated it, but then there are times when I tabbed it green, and that was when I didn't like it. Although there are more tabs of pink for the times I was appreciative of it, the green points of the book are when I thought they weighed heavier than the pink individually, and which is why I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I do still intend to read the second book, which will be about Ryston's sister Ravena. And, there seems to be the setup for her in that book, which is not set to release until October of 2021. So if you do decide to pick this up, do read with caution. I can't say that I was proud of this book, but I can't say I was fully discouraged because I still finished it. And that leads me to say, in terms of representation, as someone who is biracial, knowing where the romance genre has been, knowing where we seem to be headed, we're trying to be very progressive about how the stories are written, even if they're in a historical setting. How much realistically do we want to expect from the romance genre in a historical setting? How much can we expect for it to be a believable happily ever after? But then that also begs the question, if it's a fantasy, why can't it all be fantastical, right? Why are there these rules or standards that we still want to be realistic within a happily ever after story? So that's just my little tidbit about this book. Again, 3 stars. It's not perfect, and there are definitely times where I was just like, cringe, and could have been better. But there's a lot of bigotry that weighed in here. There's this sense of not fully accepting your love interest for something that they can't control. There's colorism in terms of skin and lighter is better ideas. It's just, there was potential. There was a setup for a second chance romance and overcoming the odds, but it falls flat. It really does. And that's all I'm going to go over for today. Just letting that simmer in a little bit more. I'm probably going to get back into my other stories and see where that goes. But again, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed my little tidbit about The Princess Stakes. And if you did read it or intend to read it, feel free to share your thoughts down below. Again, I had mixed feelings about it. 3 stars. Definitely could have been better, but it wasn't the worst thing that could have been done. It definitely could have been worse, but there were subtle points of self-hate as well as outright bigotry that made me feel really uncomfortable, and the love between them wasn't as, developed. Considering that they were 5 years apart, they didn't really build up for me as much as they could have. So, but it's not the worst thing. Like I said, it's not the worst thing. So, again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.